Here to talk about the healthcare shift, please welcome to the stage Zayna Khayat, future strategist with SE Health. Please welcome to the stage Zayna Khayat, future strategist with SE Health.
Okay, I don't know if there's much more I can add, so we're going to take it up a level and just kind of talk about the overall shift of healthcare. To see where we're going, it's important to remember, how did we even get the healthcare system we have? So some of you might remember about 15 years ago, the CBC did a contest where Canadians voted across the country for who is the greatest Canadian of all time. Anybody remember? Don't kill my punchline, hold on. So if you're from Edmonton, I gotta believe you're thinking, is this guy, right? The son of the Edmonton Oilers with awesome hockey hair. And so he was in the top 10, but he wasn't the top Canadian. He was followed by a lot of other great prominent Canadians who did a lot to kind of put our country on the map. Prime ministers, Don Cherry, Sir Frederick Banting, who founded insulin and gave that as a gift to the world. I'll bring that up after. But the number one Canadian that every Canadian voted in this CBC competition, you probably might not even know his name, Tommy Douglas. And, should I do this? Okay. And he's not the top Canadian because he's the grandfather of Kiefer Sutherland, but he is. He was the 7th Premier of Saskatchewan, and this was in the mid-1900s. And he was the first, him and his cabinet introduced universally funded health care as the first jurisdiction in all of North America. So when he's commemorated on this stamp, he is the father of Medicare for this continent. And that's a big deal to Canadians, that we believed as a value that everybody should have health care as a right and funded by the public dime. And so as Canada and health systems around the world were building their healthcare delivery models, et cetera, you know, we can all say it's been wildly actually successful. So if we look back, these are the world in pictures. So this is every country from left to right in order of life expectancy at birth. In the 1800s, before industrialization, if you were born in India or the USA, it wasn't a big difference. The average person died at 27 years old, globally. Now you kind of dial that forward another couple hundred years. By 1950, the global life expectancy was about 48 years, but you can see the huge lift kind of in the Western countries on the right of that page. And then another, 60 years later, everybody's boats are rising, and we're at a global average of about 70 years, with the biggest lift coming from the East. And Canada's kind of in the top 10 of the Wayne Gretzky's, somewhere in there. And as we saw from Jeff Rogers yesterday, yeah, we're living longer. Life expectancy has been on an exponential curve, as has been world population. So there's a lot of us, and we're living a lot longer. And while healthcare and medical technology can't take all of the credit, so sanitation, like Jack talked about yesterday, and agriculture, and just less wars, have all contributed, but healthcare's had a huge play. And so let's look back at about 2,500 years of medicine. So major medical innovations going back to Hippocrates that have really brought completely new ways and tools to see the body, treat things, keep people alive, policy innovations like the World Health Organization in the mid-1900s. But all of these were analog, right? When innovations have been analog, and that's all we've had to date in medicine, they only can scale linearly. As we build more buildings and hire more labor and more people, we can spread them out to people, but they've done a pretty good job. But we gotta remember who we evolved from, right? Our ancestors, didn't stay alive very long, but, if we look at their health span against time, they were extremely healthy. Their health span matched their lifespan because they ate the right foods and were, exercising all day. And really what killed them was either, cutting their foot and getting a disease they couldn't fight, or, bumping into a saber-toothed tiger. Well, we're a little bit different now, a few hundred years later. So if you imagine, this is what we've evolved from. We don't do labor as much. We kind of are messed up with our clocks and our whole circadian rhythm. We have access to smoking and fast food and a lot of stress. And our health span kind of looks something more like this. That little blip there is like when you have children, it all goes down, but then you recover. Maybe mine was a little lower. You know, but that kind of area under that curve, you know, is what is sickness, right? When it's not kind of peaking at the top like it was for our ancestors, that's absenteeism for your employees, unwellness or dis-ease, disease. And so if, you know, our health span kind of looks like this, you know, the new goal isn't just to keep pushing that curve to the right. And I will submit a lot of what we saw this week, and what we see a lot at Exponential Medicine are continuing to be life extension technologies. And that's great, and some people believe we have a new immortality economy, and so we will continue to push the boundaries of that. But I'm going to suggest that the new goal of healthcare systems isn't just to keep us alive for as long as possible, but to get that health span to match that lifespan. Now, the key thing about this is, in theory, we have every tool and data we need to be able to achieve this. We know exactly how to keep people healthy and then, you know, a quick, fast, painless death. So the key caveat is it has to be at a cost that is acceptable to society. And that's where this kind of scarcity versus abundance discussion comes in, because to this day, we just keep piling on more beds, more buildings, more doctors, more tests, more pills, and we're not getting that kind of incremental gain in health. And so that's what we would call a wicked problem. When you want to get benefit to the masses and your business model fundamentally doesn't allow you. And that's where exponentials kick in. So kind of looking back again at our kind of lifetime of medical technologies that have all been linear and analog, digital came on the scene in healthcare only 10 years ago. So we're like babies at this, because that was 10 years after the rest of society already was embracing digital and integrating it with their global core sectors. And you remember the 6 Ds of exponential development. They start first by having things digitized. And Tiffany showed us today, we're finally getting there in healthcare, that we're digitizing, whether it's that medical record that's going to be 15 kilometers high that Phil talked about, or all of our biology. In Canada, we're barely on the curve. We're barely on the curve. However, as we know from exponentials, once we get there with just kind of having largely digitized information, then that's a tipping point and off we go. And that is massive change. So here's some signals that we're slowly getting there. You might remember this great TV show called The Jetsons, where they already imagined, like in 1962, that you would not have to be at the same time and place as your doctor to have a visit. And we still kind of don't really have that at scale available in this country. But there's been some great developments. You might have heard of this company, Babylon Health. They are the provider of basically a doctor in your pocket, 24/7 on demand in the National Health Service in the UK for 65 million people, funded by the public. And they just arrived in Canada in partnership with TELUS, and under the public purse are now available to citizens of British Columbia. The country of Rwanda is offering top quality primary care to their citizens on the Babylon platform. I think this has huge opportunity for our First Nations populations or any of our rural Canadians. And then what's coming next, in the technology is getting better and better. Microsoft now can teleholoport your physician or the nurse or the specialist into your mother's living room if they're sick and you don't want to be in an institution or a hospital. And so that's going to get cheaper, easier, faster, and a lot more real than it is today. But we've got a way to go. So in Canada, we do a few 100 million doctor visits a year. And they quantified about less than 1% of those today are in the virtual realm. Leading health systems like Kaiser Permanente in California, they're at well over 50%. They've kind of doubled down on this. So just so you can relate to this, other than as a patient, which I'm sure you know what this is about, imagine if your employer told you the only thing that counts as work and the only time you get paid as an employee is when you're in person at the office and having in-person meetings. No emails, no conference calls, none of that stuff, right? That's the equivalent of what we're asking our healthcare system to do by not being digital and offering this channel. So every health system, every province, every hospital, my organization, we do home care, has made digital its top priority. It's a huge focus, tons of investment, and everybody's got the right idea. But we're pretty clear that that's not going to be what gets us there. It's going to help. The secret weapon in all this is going to be patients who are kind of used to living a digital life in their, every other part of their life, and then they're in the time warp when they enter the Canadian healthcare system. Eric Topol, who's a doctor at Scripps, wrote a great book to really capture this kind of movement of patients kind of taking things into their own hands, and they're almost behaving like consumers, right? So what is a consumer? A consumer pays out of their pocket for a good or a service that meets their needs. Well, healthcare isn't a consumer industry because we don't pay. Someone else pays and we just get the service, but we're behaving like consumers. And so pick a metaphor: consumerization, retailization, mallification, Uberization, Amazonification of healthcare. We're borrowing from these other industries that have figured out how to wickedly serve customers, and it's actually showing better results in both cost and quality of care. And so I think this is going to be the driving force. And if we remember what Oren talked about at the opening, and then Sean, this kind of agency of the individual, it's finally coming to healthcare, and there's just so much untapped opportunity there. So put it all together, now that we've digitized, we have this digital layer, the new technologies that are going to show up on my map of the history of medicine, are nothing like we've seen before. And so we've heard snippets of a lot of these. Each of the exponentials we track at Singularity are not only coming into healthcare on their own, like the blockchain application that Tiffany talked about today, or virtual reality to replace drugs, but they are combining in wicked ways, and each of them is on their own S-curve, and so it's all amplifying. And so just a couple quick highlights just to show you how much change is coming to healthcare. If you imagine if this was how sick you were getting and you got a sore throat and you ended up getting into the formal healthcare system, today about 90% of our resources are spent on formal sick care. But your digital exhaust is now becoming clinical data. What you searched on Google, how much you walked, all that digital biology that we heard about. And now, you combine those digital biomarkers with some interesting algorithms, and we have a whole new business model called Predictalytics. Healthcare systems haven't changed for 150 years on that sick care model, and we're asking them to kind of re-architect themselves on this kind of predictive model. 3D printing, we saw yesterday, these 3D printed prosthetics that don't only bring kind of democratization and break a bit of a cost paradigm, but hyper personalization. I don't know if any of you know anyone who's had a prosthetic, but you're kind of shopping from the catalog that everybody else gets a one-size-fits-all. Organs, as we've heard about. The one that I'm keeping an eye on is 3D printed pills. So think of the whole value chain of pharmaceutical manufacturing and distribution through pharmacy. For most generic drugs, more and more you'll be able to just 3D print them, maybe at a little local center like your Loblaws or your Sobeys, or in your home, kind of like our little Amino Labs Easy Bake Oven. Think about all the applications, right? How many of you have to buy that crappy purple pills for your kids when they have a fever? You have to cut it to get the dosage right. You can now really personalize the flavor, the shape, the dosing. And at the exponential medicine stage, which is the health stream of Singularity, last year, the chair, Dr. Daniel Kraft, shared a prototype that they're building of a print your pill for the day, where each color of those globules is kind of individual medicines. We work with seniors in my work. Most older adults are on 5 to 12 medicines a day, and they're trying to manage all the dosages in morning and afternoon. You can adjust the doses. You could put your vitamins in there, and if you're in Canada now, you could put your cannabinoids in there and print it out for the day. Other things we're going to look back at, that we used to cut people open and put them under to just biopsy a tumor. So massive dephysicalization of pretty routine procedures. A lot of that is now at the sensitivity of a blood test. And even that, our kids will look back and be like, you know, that's like the bloodletting of today, that more and more, just from your breath, we'll have pretty much most of the biological data we need to diagnose things. So just a massive democratization. And then finally, just last example of an exponential, you know, I don't know if any of you have had been pregnant or had a partner who's pregnant, where like you get that one picture of the ultrasound from that one appointment, because we timeshare radiology, ultrasounds, CT scans, MRI scans, because it's extremely capital intensive and labor intensive, and the technology is expensive. So there's now a mobile ultrasound that just connects to your phone, and Dr. Eric Topol, who's kind of the guru of the future of health, see that doctor there with the stethoscope? He predicts that'll be kind of an artifact of the past, and no doctor will walk around without a mobile ultrasound in their pocket. And then at Exponential Medicine last year, there was like a collective mind blow, like brain guts all over the auditorium, when this woman who started this company called Open Water, she is not a healthcare person. She's developing a prototype now for a wearable MRI scanner. So her prototype looked like a little ski toque. So this completely changes so many variables of how we've used this extremely important imaging technology to detect our tumors and cancers and so many other things. So let's look for that. And these are at what we call consumer electronics prices, right? $1,000 to $2,000, compared to hundreds of thousands of dollars and tons of technicians. Okay, so put that all together. This is like the money slide. This is going to summarize all the themes you heard yesterday and today about where health is going along a few dimensions. So as we've heard, the big shift absolutely from 150 years of sick care, so waiting for things to be wrong, to proactive and now predictive health care. A massive shift in the precision from kind of a one-size-fits-all. So imagine any other industry that operates on a segment of one to really like an N of one. Highly precise, personalized, and intelligence-based wellness. The channel, again, we've been relegated to kind of one channel. You go to the institution, the hospital, or the clinic. Not a lot of choice, extremely labor and capital intensive, and that's all decentralizing, dephysicalizing. The word omni-channel is now a very common lexicon in healthcare. And it's, what I'm calling digital. This kind of seamless play, or other people call it phygital, whatever, pick one. But this kind of seamless interplay between digital and physical. The duration, we've made healthcare very episodic and intermittent. You get the 10-minute visit, you get the blood test every 3 months. And as we've seen over the last 2 days, we are going to have a continuous stream and very, very early warning signals of things going wrong. And then, what I get the most excited about is a massive, massive power shift from the provider, as we've heard, to what I call people-powered healthcare. And then finally, and this is where demonetization comes in, but healthcare has had one business model for 150 years, right? No company or organization that doesn't survive its business model is going to be around, and it hasn't changed. And all those stressors are now here, focusing before on costs and inputs and fee per visit to a really outcomes-based model. So this is massive, massive change for an industry that hasn't changed that much, and it's kind of not in our DNA. And so when Vivek Wadhwa makes a statement like this, and sure, you can scratch out medicine and put energy or education or pick a sector, but for our industry, this is really, really scary, because we do not have the tool sets, the mindsets, or any of the infrastructure to adapt at this scale. And so just to bring it in relief, if you look at some of these technologies that have quickly gotten to, let's say, 50 million users, the speed at which that's happening just gets faster and faster. I think if I put Pokemon Go, it'll be like 1 hour to get to 50 million people. Pick a study anywhere, Canada, the US, in the world, consistently, the time it's taken in medicine to go from something that we know works and is better for patients or lower cost to being widespread use, let's say 50 million, is 17 years. So we've got this kind of clash of clock speeds of where patience and technology is pulling us and a system that can't adopt. And so it's no wonder, like, pick a study, this is Accenture when they looked at global core sectors. So the x-axis is how susceptible to disruption against how much has already happened. So like media and telecom will be in the top left. Oh, who shows up in the bottom right corner, right? Healthcare delivery. This is why healthcare is one of the major streams of Singularity University, because we need a lot of help to kind of guide our patients, our clinicians, and our health systems through this. Okay, so what's it all about? What does it mean for you? There's been some pretty scientific stuff here today, even for me, and I'm a scientist. So I think there's three lenses I want you to reflect on as you kind of head into whatever you do next. The first is absolutely as a user and recipient of the system, you fund it. I don't know if you know, but in every province, something like 50% of the province's budget is healthcare. I've heard ministers of finance say, I'm really the minister of health, because half their budget is healthcare. And if you're not a patient yet, or you haven't been, you are or you're gonna be a caregiver. You're gonna have a kid, a spouse, and certainly some parents who you're gonna be helping navigate their care. And so what we're getting excited about is what people are literally calling this patient revolution. Books are being written about it. And here's some signals of like crazy stuff that patients are up to. Now that they have got, all the means of production and all the information, and soon all their data. So these patients got sick and tired of being sick and tired of the cost of generic drugs. In Canada even, we're the only Western country in the world that does not publicly fund drugs. They form their own buying group. Just bypass all the intermediaries, why not? In Switzerland, taking a bit of a lesson from Visa, they formed a co-op to hold all their health data in a health bank on the blockchain platform. And then remember I talked about Frederick Banting, who, when we discovered insulin in Toronto, we gave that to the world for free, for $1. Now in the US, there's people mortgaging their house because of the price of insulin. They can't afford it, and people are, it's life-saving medicine. So, with tools like what Amino Labs showed us, people are kind of bioprinting their own insulin. And they formed a consortium to do that, fully bypassing and disintermediating a major industry. And many, many more examples of patients becoming what we call patientpreneurs. These kind of citizen hackers of their own healthcare. Okay, the next is as an employer. Some of you might remember when the auto companies were kind of imploding, GM was lamenting that for every car that came off the track at their plants, they were spending more on healthcare for their employees than on steel, right? The journalists were saying GM is a health insurance company that makes cars. And every employer, including here in Canada, is seeing that their ability to have healthy people doing great work is gonna be crippled by mental health, diabetes and cardiovascular, and now caregivers, people who are at work but have massive stress because they're also caring for somebody. And so we're starting to see employers become healthcare organizations. Walmart runs its own clinics for its staff. They're not gonna wait for the healthcare system to keep their employees healthy. This is the biggest employer in the United States. And then, baffled everybody this year, Amazon, JP Morgan, and Berkshire Hathaway, who employ 1 million people, have they're building their own healthcare system. And they're decanting all the talent from the traditional healthcare system, because it's just not gonna work to try to fix the old health system. They're gonna build it from scratch. I get super excited about some of what's coming out of here in Alberta. You might know the company InLive out of Calgary, who just spun out Wello, which is, targeting employers to build all these new tools for them to keep their people healthy. I love their tagline, healthy people do amazing things, like work. That would be a good thing. And so they're providing kind of democratized 24/7 access to primary care in your phone at a lower than I spend on my Starbucks coffee every morning, and really bringing tools so that employers don't actually have to do what Amazon did and build their own healthcare company. And then finally, the business opportunities. Startups are coming in and macking in on this turf like crazy. We're keeping a close eye on all these tech giants that never were a healthcare company are now getting into the game. And I implore you, if you're not in healthcare, come partner with us and help us fix these problems, and that's certainly what these guys are doing. And so I always wonder, all these asset-intensive companies, that are now, major players who don't own any assets, who's that going to be for healthcare? And so as healthcare shifts from being about just extending life to having our health span meet our lifespan, I turn back to our two great Canadians and some wisdom they imparted. When Tommy Douglas brought Medicare to North America, he had this vision for Canada, that the world would look up and see Canada as this jewel on the continent. I should crop in Oren's face into there because I really feel that's his energy and his vision for Singularity Canada. And I think we do as Canadians have we need to rise up and once again reshape healthcare and take advantage of all this. But I think we should also follow the wisdom of Wayne Gretzky, who said, skate to the puck. So that's what I want you to do. Go after these opportunities, anticipate what patients need, families, employers, and let's go after these opportunities to modernize healthcare with all these exponentials. Thank you so much. Have a great lunch.